Greetings to everyone, and hope you are all okay. I'm your host Aves Raza Memon for this webinar, and this webinar is on the topic Communicative Language Teaching Basics. So before we commence the webinar, I would like to tell you about the process, how this webinar will be conducted, and what is the process of getting the certificate. So first of all, this webinar is arranged by Linguistics and Pedagogy Webinars, as you already know, and the process is like that first we will be having a presentation by Ms. Shayan Aqdas. After that is done, we will have a Q&A session. In Q&A session, first we will be taking some answers, which were taking some questions which were given in registration form, and after that we will begin the live Q&A session where you can comment your questions in live chat, and we will try to answer them. So after the Q&A session ends, I will further elaborate on the process of the webinar. And one thing important to note regarding the certificate is that you have to watch the whole webinar, and in the end I will be sharing a link that would be called feedback form link, and you have to fill that in order to receive the certificate. Otherwise you won't be receiving any certificate. So I hope that's all clear. So now, without further ado, we will commence the session by welcoming Ms. Shayan Aqdas. Hello, ma'am. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Okay, ma'am. I'm also fine. So, ma'am, you can start by introducing yourself and then with the presentation.
Sure. So this is Shayan Aqdas. I did my bachelor's in English language and literature, and soon I'm going to start my master's in English and literacy studies. I have interests in English language teaching, teaching of English as second or foreign language, and applied linguistics. I am currently teaching young learners. I also have experience of teaching adult learners. So I guess that is all about me, and we can start the presentation. Okay, so the purpose of this webinar or this presentation is to promote knowledge. I welcome and thank you all for attending this webinar. As you can see on the screen, a quote that if you have knowledge, let others light their candles in it. I strongly believe that if you have knowledge, you should share it with other people. And by sharing something you learn and by sharing something new that you learn with others, it does not necessarily take away your knowledge, rather, it increases your knowledge. So, with that, I'll come to the topic of this webinar, which is communicative language teaching. So, I'm going to tell you a few basics of communicative language teaching or CLT with respect to English language teaching. So, this language teaching is an approach to language teaching where meaningful interaction is not only the ultimate goal or aim of the lesson, but it is also the means of instruction or the way of teaching. In this type of language teaching, the purpose or the goal of the language teaching is to teach the language rather than teaching about the language. And it helps the learners to develop or polish their communication skills. As the very name of this language teaching approach suggests, that the focus of this approach would be on communication. So such activities are designed and planned, and such classroom or lesson plans are designed which encourage students to interact not only with each other but also with the instructor. Thus, as I mentioned earlier right in the start, that the goal of this language teaching approach is to teach interaction, and this interaction is taught through interaction. So we are learning language in this approach. No, we are learning the we are learning about we are learning the language rather than about the language. And because communication is the focus of this classroom and the interaction of student is the focus of this classroom moves away from a traditional teacher centered or teacher focused classroom. I guess most of the audience in this webinar belongs to South Asia or Asia, and usually English is taught as second language in these areas. And especially in the context of, if we talk about Pakistan, in Pakistan, usually teaching is more teacher focused, and there is a traditional approach to teaching. A teacher stands in front of the classroom, he narrates or he reads from books, and the students are asked to fill out the exercises, or they're asked to cram the lesson, and then they are assessed from that lesson. Their learning or their memory is assessed. So in this type of language teaching approach, we move away from that type of classroom. We move towards a student centered or learner centered classroom. We try to make the learners or the students the focus of our classroom, rather than making them passively take in the information or become a passive agent in the classroom. In this type of language teaching approach, students are encouraged to actively take part in the learning process. And to make this type of language teaching approach more efficient and practical, real life situations are used as a model. When students are asked to interact with each other, when topics or activities are assigned to them, such activities or topics are designed by considering the real life situations, so that it not only helps the learners to learn the language, but it also helps them in the real life. Instead of just reading from the books or just learning the lesson or going through a chapter or a book in which there is nothing helpful for the students, this language teaching approach focuses on students and focuses to teach real life situations, and so that it can help them in real life outside the classroom. This learning approach is based on constructive theory, and according to this theory, students are not passive agents. They are not. They do not have a passive role in classroom. Rather, they construct their own knowledge and they learn their own knowledge. So this is a learner-centered approach, and as students are the active agents in the classroom, classroom is student-focused and student-centered. Teacher is just a guide and a facilitator in this classroom. He sets out some rules, he sets out some guidelines that the student should be doing this or that, and according to these guidelines, instead of becoming the center of the classroom. And this reminds me a theory of Carl Rogers. He proposed person-centered approach, according to which people are inherently motivated, and they are motivated to improve themselves, to better themselves, but only if they are provided the right conditions. When this person-centered approach or person-centered theory was applied in education, facilitative learning or facilitative teaching emerged. According to facilitative learning, students are inherently motivated. They want to learn, they want to improve themselves, but only if they are provided a favorable environment or they are provided with right conditions. And this provision of conditions or this provision of a favorable environment is the responsibility of the instructor or the teacher. So a teacher who creates favorable environment, who tries to foster a positive relationship with students, he encourages students to motivate students to learn and to engage in the classroom. A facilitative teacher must fulfill three conditions. He should have empathy for the students, he should have a positive regard for the students, and he should be an example. Rather than just asking students to not lie or not disrespect each other, he should be the model, he should be the example for the students, and he can provide right conditions by creating incentives and rewards and creating a positive environment for the students. In usually in Pakistan and our neighboring countries, such type of classroom is created, or such type of lesson plans are created or designed which pressurize the students. Only the assessment of student is focused, and the students are bombarded with tons of homework and assessments, and they are not the teacher or the classroom does not focus on the student, does not focus on the values, or does not focus on the real life situations. And all these things, the pressurized environment, the constant assignments, the constant tasks and the assessments, it reduces the motivation of the students to learn. They become disinterested, they become demotivated, they do not feel like learning, they are not engaged in the lessons. So in communicative language teaching, the teachers try to move away from this type of environment. Rather, they want to create an environment where students are active and they want to learn, they want to engage in the lesson. Moving on to the second point of this language teaching approach, students, the most important thing is students construct knowledge. When they interact with each other or when they interact with teacher, they not only learn about themselves, they also learn about other people, and in this way they construct their own knowledge. Another main thing of this approach is that students should be divided in groups or pairs so that they can interact with each other and learn in a better way. Another very important thing of this, another important, a very important point of this language approach, teaching approach, is that the curriculum or the syllabus we design for the students is student driven. Students can suggest topics. Students should suggest topics in this type of learning approach, and this helps the students to become active and they are interested and in the lesson. For instance, if we teach students about things they are not interested in, they become easily very bored. They are not interested in lesson. They are distracted. They start talking among themselves. They become occupied with other things. But if we ask them to suggest topics, and if we apply those topics, or if we teach those topics in the classroom, it motivates them to engage in the lesson. For instance, if a student is interested in sports and the lesson is focused on sports, or the teacher mentions, even the mention, just the mere mentioning of the sports makes the student active. They are interested in the lesson, they are interested in what the teacher is saying. So students should be given the opportunity to suggest topics, and those topics should be used in this language teaching approach. But in some situations, the syllabus or the curriculum is already designed or is already defined by the governing bodies or the education boards. In that situation, what we can do, what the teachers can do is, you do not necessarily have to make a boring lesson more boring, or you do not have to teach a boring thing in a boring way. You can ask students suggestions, you can ask students interest, and while teaching that defined syllabus, you can bring up things that students are interested in. You can relate that lesson to students interest. In this way, students are active, students are engaged, and they want to learn more about that topic. Moving on to adaptive learning, this type of approach is focused on constant modification, constant adoption. For instance, if something does not work out, in this type of learning approach, we try to remove that thing. And if something is working out, we try to apply that thing in a future lesson. So it is the constant modification that makes this type of learning approach successful. Moreover, it is process based learning. Students are assigned a topic or students are assigned a problem, and they are asked to solve that problem, and they do that. They come up with solutions and strategies by interacting with each other. They are divided in pairs and they are divided in groups. There is a proper process of this learning. And another very interesting thing about this approach is that students evaluate their own learning. Teachers also play a very important role in the assessment, but as I mentioned earlier, the teacher is just a guide, he is just a facilitator. He can be there to suggest students, to help them out if they want any help or to clarify concepts, but he is not an active agent in the classroom. Rather, students are the active agents in the classroom. So, what students do in this type of learning approach is, when they are divided in the groups, they are encouraged to evaluate or assess their own learning. And while interacting, they all are also encouraged to assess each other's learning, to assess their peers' learning. For instance, if two students are divided in a pair, they are grouped in a pair, and they are debating on a certain topic. How they can evaluate each other's learning is that they can see that if the other person is properly listening to them, if the other student is properly presenting some points. So in this way, he can assess learning skills, listening skills, speaking skills, and in this way, communication. The very essence of this approach, communication is encouraged, and students interact with each other. We should also, the very important thing about this classroom is that because this classroom focuses on interaction and there is constant interaction among the students, the classrooms can get noisy. But we should know that, and we should make sure that our teachers or our coordinators or our principals, they know that a noisy classroom does not mean an undisciplined one. And if you are trying to apply this learner centered approach, or if you're trying to use this communicative language approach in your classrooms, make sure that you are situated in such a environment in which your neighboring classrooms or the other students or teachers do not get disturbed with that noise. And this noise can also be reduced by applying several strategies. There are many ways to reduce this noise. Students can be talkative and students should be talkative, and a noisy classroom and talkative students are the indication that this learning approach is a successful one, because students are interacting, they are talking to each other, they are talking with the instructor. And I was going to say that the noise, how that noise can be reduced, you can apply several cues, you can clap, and this can indicate, you can tell your students in advance that if I clap in this way, it means that you have to control your volume, you have to lower your volume. If I knock on the board, if I knock on the door, it means you are very loud, so you should be disciplined. So these cues can make sure that your classroom is that your lesson plan is successful, but at the same time your classroom is a disciplined one. Moving on to a very basic of this learning approach, the foundation of this learning approach is designing learners profiles. As a teacher, it is very important that the teachers know about their students. If you do not know about your learner, you can never teach them efficiently. They will never learn properly. You do not know what your student is going through, what your students' interests are, what your students' dislikes are. How can you teach them efficiently? You are just there, you are just trying to teach in your own way, according to your own values, according to your own interests. And the student is just a passive agent in your classroom. He's not learning anything, other he's just there as out of compulsion. So make sure that right at the start of a school year, the teachers are designing learners profile. And I will tell how this learners profiles can be designed. But before that, let me share some learning style types and intelligences. So there are several learning style types. Students learn in different ways. I'm just going to mention just four of these learning styles. Some learners are visual learners. They learn best by seeing and observing. So, for these learners, you can use multimedia, you can use visual graphics, you can encourage their better learning, you can motivate them to learn by using visual media, by using visual graphics, so that they are interested, so they are motivated to learn. And by using these types of material, can engage them in the learning process. Then there are students who learn best when they hear something. For such students, you can play voice notes, you can play songs, you can play voice clips. So these students learn better when they hear, when they listen to something. Even when a teacher is presenting a lecture, when teacher is dictating something, they learn better. They, because by just hearing the lecturer or by just hearing the teacher. Then there are kinesthetic type of learners. These learners are the ones who learn best when they move around or they try to do something. For such students, you can design activities in which they are moving around, in which they have to be divided in the pairs, in which they have to move from one table to another, and they are constantly moving around, or they are doing something with their hands or their arms, or they're just the essence of this type of learners learning profile or learning style is that they are just moving, so they learn better by using their body. Then there are tactile learners. These are the learners who learn best by touching or observing materials or objects by holding them. For instance, you are trying to describe what an apple is, how an apple is to your students. So to do this, now as I mentioned earlier, there are some students who learn by seeing and observing. So if you just show them an apple, they will learn what an apple is, its characteristics, and everything you are trying to teach them just by showing that apple to your learners. But then, as I was explaining, tactile learners, these are the learners who learn best when they hold that apple, when they observe that apple by touching it. So make sure you know your learners learning styles, and how you can improve their learning. Another important part of this learner's profile is making sure you know about their intelligences. It is also a part of learning style. There are a lot of multiple intelligences. Few of them are mentioned here, as you can see on the screen. There is linguistic intelligence, students who are word smart. They want to learn new words, they want to use these words in their daily conversations. Then there are students who learn better when numbers are involved. They are good at subtracting, adding, multiplication, division. So these learners are the ones who learn better when numbers or maths is involved. Then there are learners who are picture smart, as I mentioned earlier, visual learners who learn better when they are seeing something, when they're observing something. Then bodily kinesthetic intelligence, as mentioned earlier. Then there is musical intelligence, students who are music smart. They do better, they learn better, they are engaged, they are motivated when music is involved in the lesson. When music is played, they listen to songs, they try to create their own songs, they try to sing songs, and in this way they can learn better. Then there are interpersonal and intrapersonal learning style types, in which some students learn better, or they are motivated to take part in the learning process when they are divided in the groups, when they have to work with other people. They do better by discussing, by designing things, or by designing projects or work by discussing, or by talking to each other, by interacting. And intrapersonal students are the ones who like to do things by themselves. They want to just be by themselves when they are designing something. But as these learners profile a type of communicative language teaching, it is the responsibility of teacher to group these students in such a way that intrapersonal students with intrapersonal intelligence, they learn better. Even when they are divided in the group, they are given the opportunity to do few things by themselves. The main purpose of this teaching approach is encouraging interaction, encouraging communication. So if you just allow the students with intrapersonal intelligence to work by themselves, the purpose of this language teaching approach is not being fulfilled. So you need to group students in such a way, you need to design or plan activities in such a way that all the students are actively involved and their intelligences are being used. Moving on to types of CLT activities. There are several types of communication language teaching approaches, uh, activities, but the very foundation of these activities is that students are divided in groups and they are divided in pairs. So, a few of these are mentioned on the screen. First of all, role plays and short performances. When students are assigned a certain character and they are asked to perform in that way that they are the character. For instance, you are assigning a certain student that, okay, you are this actor, you are this prime minister, you are this political leader, or you are this student. So you are assigning them a certain character, and they have to perform in such a way that they are doing better by interacting, by communicating, but in a way that they become that character. So this type of approach is successful when students are interacting and communicating. But the way these activities are designed, for instance, just like I was mentioning, that if you are using role plays and you're assigning a certain character to the student, a student should be involved in that activity or in that learning approach or that lesson in such a way that he becomes that character. He's not just narrating, or he's just not reading the dialogues or the lines of that character, rather he becomes that character. Then there are interviews in which a certain group of students are asked to become judges, and then there is another group of students. You can assign them that they are taking part in that interview, or you yourself, the instructor, can be the judge of the interview, and you can ask the students certain questions. Then there are activities like pitching ideas and presentations. You give them a topic. Okay, the topic of this week is how to reduce food waste. Now students have to work in groups, they have to debate, they have to discuss how food wastage can be reduced. and they have to design, they have to plan, and then they have to present that topic. Similarly, another type of this presentation or pitching idea activities can be like solving problems. You give them a problem like climate crisis. Now they have to give suggestions, they have to give tips, they have to discuss the advantages and disadvantages. But all these activities are being done in groups and pairs. Make sure that the students are involved, the students are divided in groups so they are communicating with each other. Another type of activities is task completions or involving puzzles, crosswords, or games. But I'm mentioning it again and again that make sure your students are divided in groups, because that is the very purpose of this type of teaching approach. So there is an example of crossword. So there is on one side a description is given of the words, and on the other side there is a puzzle which students have to solve. It is about technical vocabulary, but make sure that you already have taught them this vocabulary. You have described those words, you have defined those words, and the students know those words. So in this way, by using a crossword puzzle, you can assess their learning. Did students really learn about those words? Do they know what those words or what that vocabulary means? And this can be done by dividing students in groups. They have to discuss the details or the description of the words, and they have to guess the words. And it can be assessed or evaluated by just exchanging the crossword puzzle, or the teacher can just mark these puzzles later on. But the purpose of this puzzle is again so that students are divided in groups, they are interacting, they are communicating with each other, they are discussing. For instance, there is a question to oil. The vocabulary term or the word for the number for word number 3 to oil is lubricate. So they have to discuss what does that mean, what which are the things which you can oil, where do you use this. As these things have already been discussed in classroom, so it is easier for them to guess these words. But this all these activities are taking place in groups. As I mentioned earlier, that in communicative language teaching approach, students are the center of the class. The classroom is student centered. The students are the focus of the class. It involves metacognitive learning. Metacognitive learning is basically learning about learning. Students are actively involved in this type of learning. They are asked to suggest the topics. When activities are being planned or prepared or designed, students are asked about their suggestions. When learning strategies are involved, students are asked about their suggestions. As teachers have created learner profile right at the start of the school year, the teachers use those learner profiles to design such activities in which all those learner profiles are being used. And when these learner strategies are used, as I mentioned earlier, that the role of the teacher is of a facilitator, of a guide. So when these strategies are being used, the teacher should make sure that those strategies that he used in the classroom are successful. And this can be done by monitoring the classroom. The teacher does not have to interfere in the learning process. If something is not working out, the teacher does not need to stop that learning process. Rather, he should just take notes of that thing, and we should correct that in the future lesson plans. And in this way, the teacher knows how you can combine different strategies, how these strategies can be assessed, and how different types of learning can be encouraged or promoted. But make sure that the students are involved in this type of learning, and they know what they are learning and how they are learning. By suggesting learner strategies, for instance, a student says that, okay, please use more visual media, because they know that they learn better by seeing or by observing visual media. So they are suggesting, they are taking part in in the process of planning or designing learning activities. This metacognitive learning or teaching can be done by using visual graphics or by using these handsheets. For instance, at the end of the lesson, you ask the students to share what they learned from this lesson, what they want to improve, or how the learning process can be improved. Similarly, you can also create story map. Okay, so if you learned about a story, or if you learned about a novel, you were reading a novel. So what was the setting of that novel, where it was taking place, which characters were the main characters, which were the minor characters. So you make sure that students know what they're doing and what they're learning. Another very important part of teaching is feedback. If a teaching process does not involve feedback, in my opinion, it is not a successful teaching, because feedback encourages or feedback enables a teacher to learn about their way of teaching. And if a correct feedback and timely feedback is provided, mistakes can be corrected. With things which are successful, they can be used in future lessons. There is a very successful model which is being used all across the world. It is praise, question, polish, or PQP, peer feedback. This can be done by asking your colleagues or your coordinators to observe your class, or it can also be done by asking your students to give feedback about your lesson. So, the first part of this feedback is praise. Ask your colleague to observe your classroom, and after the class ends, the teacher or your colleague praises few things about your lesson, the things they like, and the reason why they like those things. Then they question about your lesson, that a certain thing which was not clear, or a concept which they want to clarify. And then polish, in which they share their suggestions or tips to improve certain lesson. It can also be done by asking students to share their feedback. For instance, after completing a lesson, the students can tell the teacher that, okay, we liked how you used visual media, or we liked how you used songs, or you asked us to create or design songs and then asked us to sing those songs. So, this was a very nice thing about your lesson. And the reason why we liked this was because we like to learn through music. Then there is a question, but there was this part of lesson that we did not understand. Can you please clarify this thing? And lastly, polishing, that students, or as I mentioned earlier, your colleagues give you suggestions how your lesson can be improved, the mistakes there were, and how those mistakes can be corrected. So that is all from my side, and there is a very important thing that I want to mention, that this presentation was inspired from TESOL methodology course. I recently took a course from University of Maryland as a part of online professional English network, which was sponsored by US Embassy. So these things were these this material was inspired from TESOL methodology. Thank you all for listening. So, Wes, if you can, we can move towards question and answer session.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really a wonderful presentation and very uh, good insights were given, and the ways in which we can level up our teaching and also understand the students in better way. Like as you mentioned, they have different type of intelligences and they have different types of learning, and then all the techniques which you talked about, they were really great. So now we will move towards the second part of our webinar, that is Q&A session. So first, as mentioned earlier, that we will be answering some questions from registration form. There is a field in registration forms in which you can put your questions. So these questions are from that form. So the first question is from Peter. In learning languages, generally, can one apply same methodological strategies and arrive at same positive results, or we need to add other extra strategies?
Okay, so Peter, your question is a very insightful and helpful one. So I believe that while learning languages, similar strategies can be used and they can prove very successful. But make sure that when you are teaching that language, same context is also being used. For instance, if we talk about Pakistan, English is a second language for many of the students, and for most of the students, and for most of the population in Pakistan. We regularly come across this language. So when learning this type of language, different strategies are used, and right from the start of the school year, students are taught English in a different way because they have a constant exposure to that language. So certain strategies which can be very successful while teaching English language, they do not necessarily prove to be very successful when teaching a language which the students do not know, or which or something which they haven't come across earlier. For instance, if we try to teach students Arabic language, or if we try to teach them Chinese language, I'm talking about Pakistani students. So they do not have exposure to that language. So it does not necessarily mean that the same strategies which we are using to teach them English can prove to be successful by teaching them Chinese or any other language. So we need to make sure that the context which is there while teaching language, if it is similar, I believe that the same strategies can be used and they can prove to be very successful. For instance, the way we teach English in Pakistan, it can be the same as when English is being taught in India or Bangladesh or our neighboring countries, because we have constant exposure to that language. So make sure that the context is similar. If the context is similar, I believe it can be very successful.
Okay, so it can mean that if we can follow the same strategy if we have the same context. Like context is very necessary in order to a strategy to be successful, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the next question is from Muhammad Imran Bhatti. Most of the students are difficult to communicate in English. Face difficulty and communicating in English, particularly in rural areas whose medium of education is not English. How to boost their confidence in English?
So, Muhammad Imran Bhatti has raised a very important question and a very common problem that our students face and our teachers face, especially in Pakistan. Students are usually hesitant and shy when it comes to communicating in English, especially in rural areas, because they do not have exposure to that language. At their home, a different language is being spoken. Outside their home, a different language is being spoken, and inside a classroom, a different language is being spoken. So it can be very difficult for those students when they do not have a constant exposure or they do not have the right environment to speak that language. As mentioned in the presentation, that when students are provided right conditions or favorable conditions, they are motivated to learn. But as in the context of our rural areas, there is not a lot of usage of English, so it can be difficult for them to practice their language. But the ways through which we can boost their confidence, make sure that your students know that it is all right to make mistakes, especially when they are at the beginner phase or when they are just starting to learn a language. You do not necessarily have to be perfect at it. You do not have to be fluent. You do not have, your accent does not need to be perfect. You just need to convey your meaning. You just need to be good at it. So make sure that they know it is all right to make mistakes while learning. And it is not just about language, and it is just not about English language. It is this can be applied in all kinds of teaching, in all kinds of learning. When we are learning a new thing, we are not perfect right away. We need to constantly learn, we need to constantly adapt, we constantly need to modify our learning. So another way to boost their confidence is make sure that they know that they have uh, they have the right environment, or they have the opportunity to use language in the classroom, and make sure that no one is making fun of each other, especially teachers, because often teachers end up using harsh comments or they end up making fun of the students for making a mistake. So make sure these things are being avoided in the classroom, because this can significantly cause damage to students confidence. So try to make sure that you are providing them right conditions, you are designing activities which involve their learning, which involve them speaking English. For instance, there is a classroom of 30 students, and you observe that out of those 30 students, there are two students who are very hesitant in speaking English, even when you are designing very engaging activities. Try to make sure that you are talking to them at a private level. You are asking them, you are reaching out to them. Try to try to ask them what problems they are facing and how those problems can be avoided or how those problems can be tackled. So make sure that you are communicating with your students and you're providing them right conditions and I guess right environment. So I guess that is the very important thing while developing confidence in learners, especially the beginner learners of English language.
All right, so we might say that the environment should be lenient, and the teachers should be like encouraging the students and the whole environment as a whole should be very encouraging and supportive and not focusing on the mistakes, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the next question is from Saima Larik. Is communication only important for teaching? I guess it's regarding the English language teaching.
Okay, sure. So I do not believe that communication is only limited to teaching, especially English language teaching. I believe that communication is the very essence, very foundation of our society. Even if we are at home, we are communicating with each other. At office place, we are communicating with each other. In classroom, we are communicating with each other. So communication is the very important part of our society, especially in teaching. As if we talk about this English language teaching in English language teaching context, as I mentioned earlier, in most of the traditional classrooms, we are just teaching students about a language. We are teaching them tenses, we are teaching them about adjectives, adverbs, and things like that. We are not focusing on that very language that we are trying to teach them. For instance, in most of the classroom in Pakistan, we just teach the students we just teach them how to solve a certain exercise by using correct tenses. The students do not know how to communicate in that language. So I do not think that the purpose of teaching that language is being fulfilled when communication is not being taught to them. So I guess that would answer your question, Simon. We can move to the next question, Navesh.
All right, thank you. And the next question is from Rania. How do we really motivate students so that they would want to learn, not feel that they have to?
Okay, so I guess this question was answered in the presentation that to motivate students, the teachers need to know about their students. You should know what your students are interested in, what their likes are, what their dislikes are. If you are teaching them something which they are not interested in, obviously they will not be motivated. They will feel that they do not want to be there. They are just there out of compulsion. So to motivate them, you need to provide them right conditions. You need to involve them in the learning. You need to design or plan lesson and activities in such a way that it encourages those students to actively take part in the classroom. So I guess the presentation has quite clearly answered your question that make sure you know about your students' interests. And this is the very important thing while motivating students. Another very important thing is creating incentives and rewards while teaching. When students do not achieve proper, they do not get proper feedback or proper rewards or incentives, they feel like the hard work they did, not really it was not really worth it. For instance, if a student spent all night designing a presentation or designing a certain project, and the next day the teacher just nods at it or just says, okay, good job. Even the mentioning of these two words, good job, can mean a lot to student, but they want more than that. They want rewards, they want incentives, and these rewards and incentives and proper positive feedback can encourage them to learn. If you congratulate a student, if you uh, tell them that they did a wonderful job in front of all the students, or if you reward them with a certain thing or marks or anything like that, it makes sure that not only that very student is encouraged to do better in the future, but all the other students who are seeing that that student got rewarded for their hard work, they would like to do better in the future because they would also like to have those rewards or incentives. So make sure that these things are being applied in the classroom, and I believe these can motivate students significantly.
Very well answered. As you already mentioned in the presentation, that they should not feel as they have some kind of compulsion to do the tasks in the class, but they should really enjoy it. So, very well answered. So, now the next question is from Manoj. Is there any disadvantage in learning English through movies, shows, YouTube, etc.? Like many people just watch the movies and shows or YouTube, and they acquire the language instead of formally learning it. So is
Yes.
that an advantage, or it should be considered as disadvantages?
So I guess most of people would agree with me that learning anything, whatever it is, can never be a disadvantage. The process of learning is always advantage for students. always puts the learners at advantage. And I mentioned this in my presentation as well, that there are different types of learners who learn in a different way. Some people learn better when they watch movies or shows, or some students or learners learn better when they listen to something. So I do not believe there is any disadvantage in learning through movies and shows, but I guess we should make sure that the learners are using the correct material. For instance, if they're just watching movies or shows which are not really helpful, which in the long term, or they're not providing any, I guess, right information or helpful information, it may not be very helpful for them. It may not improve their learning. But I guess even in that case, somehow it does help them in learning that language, as mentioned, and acquiring that language. So I do not think, or I do not believe that learning in any way, whatever medium you may use, may put you at disadvantage.
All right, very well answered. Now we will move towards the last three questions from the registration form, and then we will move towards the live questions. So it's from Garia. How does technology affects our daily communication?
So I guess everything has its pros and cons. Technology also has its ups and downs. But if we look at the bigger picture, technology has significantly improved our communication. Our friends and families are just a text and call away. We can send them a picture, we can send them a video, and this is a way of communication. Even if you're just sending a picture and you're not using your words, it is a way of communication. So if we talk about the bigger picture, it has improved our daily communication. But at the same time, I guess it has also put at some disadvantage. For instance, I guess everyone can agree with this, that when we are sitting with our family or friends, everyone is busy with their own mobile phones or with their own gadgets. So it can cause gaps between each other, and it can reduce your communication. But at the whole, if we look at the bigger picture, I believe it has improved our daily communication, especially if we talk about language teaching. And in the teaching context, technology has been used to employ different I guess materials, use different materials using of movies and pictures and visual media and all multimedia. These types of things have improved language teaching. So I guess technology has more advantages if we talk about language teaching and communication.
All right, very clear answer. Now for the next question is from Mark. What interventions are the best to avoid communication breakdown or end gap?
Okay, so communication breakdown and gap can take place anywhere, even in the classroom, outside the classroom, in the workspace. And I believe when we talk about communication breakdown or gap, we mean that when a thing is being communicated, sometimes it is miscommunicated, or the listener does not do what he or she is asked, or does not do that thing at all. So to avoid these things, make sure that the thing which is being communicated is clear enough, and you ask the listener to repeat, or you make sure that the listener clearly got your point. If we talk about communication breakdown and gap in language teaching context, usually teachers use only the target language, in this case English language, in classrooms. And sometimes students may not really get the instructions when those instructions are being shared in the target language, especially for the learners who are learning English as foreign or second language, and they're just at the beginner stages. So make sure that sometimes the first language or the native language or the mother tongue is being used in the classroom, especially while explaining details or explaining guidelines, or the process or way of doing a certain thing. For instance, if a teacher is assigning students a certain activity, and the teacher is just using the target language, the students may not completely get those descriptions or in the details, and they may end up doing the activity incorrectly. So make sure that you are communicating clearly enough, and the audience, the listeners, are properly getting your point. And you can do this by asking your students, by asking the listener to repeat what you just said, or what you just shared, or if they have anything they would like to clarify, or if they have anything that they would like to ask.
All right. So now moving towards the last question, that is from Marika. What are the latest language teaching strategies which are suitable for online teaching?
So I guess I do not really have just one thing in mind. Online teaching is constantly expanding and constantly being modified, and it is constantly progressing. And there are a lot of strategies which can be used in this type of teaching. But the most important thing is usage of multimedia, usage of graphic organizers, usage of visual media. But make sure that while these latest technologies and these latest strategies are being used, that interaction between students and teacher is not reduced. There is already a barrier of screen between the teacher and the student, and it is not like the usual traditional face-to-face classroom where you can observe the students, where you can just see the body language or the gestures or the facial expression of the student, and you can know that if the student is getting certain thing or if they are facing any confusion. So make sure that that interaction is not reduced in online teaching. It can be very difficult to focus on all the students in this type of teaching approach in online teaching, but make sure that they you are asking about their feedback, or you are providing them correct or right conditions to share things or to ask things which in which they are facing difficulties. For instance, if you do not have enough time during the classroom, you can arrange extra classes, or you can arrange a feedback form or something like that. Because when it comes to online teaching, you can use different online platforms, you can use Google Docs, you can use Google Forms, you can use any of these such forms to ask students to share their suggestions. If you're teaching young learners, for instance, students of age from 5 to 10 or 5 to 11, you can ask their parents to fill out those forms for on the behalf of their children. So make sure that these strategies are being used while teaching students online.
Okay, thank you, ma'am, for answering all these questions. I hope the people who asked these questions have got their answers. And now let's take some live questions which are being posted in comment section. So let me just okay. So now we will be taking some live questions, and you can comment your question in the live chat. And if live chat is not visible to you, then make sure you are using the YouTube app if you are watching from mobile, or you are directly on the YouTube website and then watching the webinar, and you are also logged into your Gmail account. That's how you will be able to see the live chat. So now let's take some questions. Okay, so audience, you can now write your questions in the comment section. Okay, so now we will wait for a while till they write your questions. So the question from Sakib Javed is it possible in public sector institutions like this communicative language teaching? Is it possible in public sector
Oh,
institutions where the budget is low and the technology is not available?
yes, that can be a problem in public sector institutions, especially if you're talking about Pakistan. But as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of ways in which these strategies can be used. You do not necessarily have to use multimedia, or you do not necessarily have to move away from that traditional teaching approach. You just need to know about your students' interest and the likes and dislikes. For instance, if we talk about Pakistan, the syllabus is already defined for the students. If we talk about intermediate students, there was a book being taught throughout Pakistan, Mr. Chips, the novel. So it could be boring for students, it could be boring for a lot of students. But the way this that language teaching, or that the teaching of that book could become interesting, is by asking the students interest, by making them divide in groups and pairs. I guess dividing students in pair can be done in any sector. It does not necessarily involve a lot of resources. You just have to divide the students in groups, and you just have to encourage communication among themselves. You can ask them to present a chapter from that book. You can ask them to share their opinion about that book. You can encourage them to analyze that chapter by discussing with each other. And in some public sector institution, English is not really a medium of instruction, although English is being taught to them. Sometimes even the subject of English is taught in their native language or in the first language. So the target language can be taught by encouraging. The main purpose of this language teaching approach is encouraging communication. So it can be done in any way. You do not have to use multimedia, or you do not have to use expensive gadgets and expensive resources. Even, I can understand that even in some public sector institutions, sharing or distributing the handouts can be very difficult because it has to come out of the pocket of the teacher himself. So or you do not necessarily have to go for these expensive things. You just have to divide the students in groups. You just need to know about your students' interests and dislikes and likes, and you need to involve the students in the learning process. Ask the students how they would like to learn a certain thing, which things should be avoided, which things should be applied. I guess that would answer your question, Sakib.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Uh, Now, this question is from Laika. What are the specific digital tools that may help improve students' engagement in learning the language?
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, that there are different types of students with different type of learning intelligences and different types of learning styles. So make sure that you know. I am repeating this again and again. That make sure you know that your what your students likes and dislikes, and how your students would like to learn. You should know this kind these information pieces of information. So when it comes to teaching the language or learning the language or encouraging engagement, specific digital tools that can be used are multimedia, using multimedia in the classroom, sharing presentations, sharing visual graphics, using or sometimes you can even screen a short movie or short video for the students so they are engaged in that lesson. Moreover, I guess almost all of the students in these days have access to mobile devices or other digital devices. You can even assign them work at home by sharing activities or designing activities with different online website. For instance, through Google Docs, you can create very visual appealing or graphic using graphic organizers, a Google Form or Google Doc, and you can share that with your students. And there are a lot of such digital tools which can help students engagement in learning language.
Okay, very well answered. Now, this is the question from Dr. Eid Abdul Azam, asking how to apply this approach in big classes, like where students are more than 100 or something like that. So, how can we apply this approach in those classrooms?
Okay. So it can be a bit difficult when it comes to big classes, because dividing the students in large groups, it can become a bit difficult, and it can create a lot of noise, as I mentioned earlier, and the classroom may get disruptive, and the discipline of that classroom can be disturbed. But make sure that when it comes to big classes, you are dividing the students in smaller groups. For instance, instead of dividing students in groups of 10 or 20, in which some because when you arrange larger groups, sometimes there are few students which go unnoticed, or students which are not very active, and you may not notice them and you may not observe them, that whether they are taking part in the discussion or if they are just being quiet. So to make sure that this type of approach is successful in big classes, instead of trying to teach, or instead of just trying to make sure that all the groups are taking part in the learning process in one day, you can divide your lessons across a week, across months. You can ask a certain group to take part in the classroom one day, and you can focus on another group the next day. So make sure that you are dividing the time correctly. you are making sure that every student is taking part in the classroom by focusing on them, by dividing your time, by dividing the groups in such a way that every student gets the opportunity to take part in the classroom. And as the role of teacher in this type of classroom is of facilitator, of a guide, the teacher can move around the classroom, he can observe if the students are taking part in the classroom, and if you see that some students are not very actively taking part in the classroom or in the groups, sometimes it can happen that the confident students or the students who like to talk and take the lead, and they just occupy the whole talking stage, and in groups they can be the only ones speaking, and the other students are just quietly sitting there passively taking in information, and they're just nodding their head or things like that. So make sure that you reach out to those students, or you group them in such a way that all the students encourage each other to participate in the classroom, instead of just being one student being the center of that discussion or the center of that group.
All right. So now we will be taking our last question from live session, and that is CLT is very significant for students to learn a second language effectively and efficiently. On the other hand, are there any pitfalls for this kind of strategy or approaches? Like in simpler words, it would be disadvantages of
Yes.
CLT.
There can be, as I mentioned earlier, regarding technology, there is always a positive and negative side to everything, even if it comes to teaching approaches. So I have mentioned all the advantages and the pros of this type of communicative language teaching approach. There are certain disadvantages of this approach. For instance, when we are focusing on interaction and communication, sometimes the accuracy of language is overlooked. We just focus on the usage of language. We just try to make sure that the students are communicating, or they are just being fluent, or they are just taking part in the classroom. Sometimes we do not notice the mistakes of the students, or we do not correct those mistakes, because that is the purpose of language teaching, this type of language teaching approach. Rather than just pointing the mistakes of students right in the middle of the learning process, this type of learning approach focuses on, or rather encourages the students to communicate without that fear of being disrupted or being disturbed while speaking. So it can be one of the disadvantage that the accuracy or the correct usage of the language can be overlooked. Moreover, as I mentioned earlier, it can become very noisy, and sometimes that noisy classroom can lead to a very disruptive one. I mentioned this earlier that a noisy class does not necessarily have to mean an undisciplined one, but at times when it just like I was answering the previous question, sometimes when it comes to bigger classrooms, you can the noisy classroom can become an undisciplined one. Students can become disrespectful to each other and towards the instructor, and they try to create a mess in the classroom. So these are the few disadvantages of this type of approach, but all these things can be tackled, all these things can be solved by making sure that you are applying the right strategies. You are constantly modifying your lesson plans and your classroom. If something is not working out, make sure that you are not using that in the future lessons. If something is working out, make sure that you are using that in the future lessons. uh, Unless your voice is muted.
Okay, sorry for that. So, ma'am, thank you for your insights, your webinar, and all the answers you gave for all these questions. It must have been very exhausted for you to continue for about an hour, and also for our audience maybe. So, however, they are quite active, and you also. So now we will now we will put an end to this webinar for now, and let's hope that you also continue the webinar with us some other time. And now I will be telling the audience about the certificate process. And ma'am, again, thank you for your time and your valuable lessons you gave here today. And also, thanks a lot from the audience. I could see some comments of the audience. They are saying thanks. So, thanks to you, and thanks to all the audience for joining the webinar. And I hope you all have learned something from this today. and I hope ma'am have also enjoyed the session. So, ma'am, thank you very
Thank you so
much.
much, Aves, for having me today, and thank you. I would like to thank the audience as well. I can see a lot of comments, and I'm sorry if I could not answer questions. I guess I can see a lot of questions which went unanswered, but I hope we can continue these series of webinars, and hopefully, I would like to see this audience in the future as well. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so participants, thank you for actively participating in the webinar and asking the questions, and also being active throughout the webinar. So now, without further ado, I will be sharing a feedback form link in the live chat. And if you cannot see the live chat, please try to open this webinar through YouTube app, or from, if you are using on a laptop or something, then you can open the YouTube website itself, and then you would be able to see the live chat option. So now in the live chat, I am posting a link, so you might be able to see a link in the live chat from Linguistics and Pedagogy Webinars. Click on that link. You will be redirected towards a form, that is feedback form 25th June. So after filling that form, you will be able to receive the certificate within few days. And someone questions that, will the video be available to rewatch it? Yes, sure, it will be available on our YouTube channel. And and thank you everyone for joining. And I have shared the link. Kindly click on the link which is given in the comment section. Right. So, and we are sorry if some questions went unanswered because of the restraint of the time. We could not include all of the questions, but we tried to add enough questions so every general aspect of the topic is cleared. I hope so. So we have got 6 responses on the form so far. Kindly fill the feedback form. Only the people who have filled the feedback form will be receiving certificates. Otherwise, not. And this link would not be available there for long. As the webinar ends, the link will also disappear, and after a while, the live chat recap will be available on YouTube, but the link will be closed. So make sure you fill the form, and also make sure that the name which you write in the form has correct capitalization, and all the things are written correctly, because the name would be directly copied from your form to the certificate. So, in order to avoid any mistakes or misspellings in the your certificate, can you make sure to fill the feedback form correctly? And now I will be sharing some of our future webinars, our upcoming webinars. So we had actually 3 webinars scheduled, but one of them is postponed, and these two are still on for you to register. This one is on using narrative inquiry in linguistic research on 14th July, and the other is on 24th July, politeness and pragmatics. We hope to see you in these webinars as well. So yes, uh, and if you are facing any problem with the feedback form, or if you cannot see the link, or is there any other problem, you can tell us. You can, if you cannot see the live chat after trying a lot, so you can just email us your name, so we can like arrange the certificate for you. But only the emails which have been sent during this online session would be considered as valid. Okay, thank you everyone. So we have got 77 responses so far on our feedback form, and thank you everyone for being with us, taking your time out to learn something. And why does the form says June 18? Uh, Let me see. Oh, we are really sorry. 18 June is just a mistake. So kindly ignore that. June 18. The form link is valid. So you can fill it. And thank you everyone for joining. In feedback form, there is written feedback form 18 June. So kindly ignore that. It's just a typo. It's this link which I am sharing is for the webinar we just had on 25th. Yes, Mohammad Imran, we also noticed. It's just a mistake. You can ignore that. And the form is valid. I'm sharing the link in the live chat. So kindly fill it as soon as possible. We have got 108 responses so far on our feedback form. We learned a lot. Thank you, Julie. Uh, Uriel says, done. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining the webinar. uh, how long we can get the certificate. uh, like it might take 2 days or even 1 day depending on the number of certificates we have to prepare. So we will update about it on our Facebook page. Facebook page's name is also Linguistics and Pedagogy Webinars. So like that page and follow that for regular updates. We also update there about the certificates and about the future webinars. So thank you everyone for joining. Hope to see you on the next webinars. All right, and thank you all for your suggestions. If you have any feedback for me, you can write it on the feedback form. There is a section given feedback for the host. I would really appreciate that. It would help me to improve. And you can also give compliments to the resource person, Shayan Aqdas, in the form. She gave a wonderful presentation and took her time to attend this session. So, okay, so we have been receiving the comments like feedback form from 18 June. Yes, it is a mistake. It's not from 18 June. It is of today, 25th June. So kindly ignore that mistake and fill the form. Okay, see you again, sir, and thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. And a webinar on basic online English teaching would be great. I know you could find the right presenter. Thank you, sir. We will try to arrange such a webinar. And thank you for your suggestion. Okay, thank you. We are also looking forward to see you guys again in a webinar with us. And thank you for supporting. So kindly fill the feedback form. I'm again commenting the link. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I hope you all didn't face any problem regarding feedback form. Apart from that, its name is 18 June. I hope you can all fill it. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Please conduct more English topic webinars. Sure, we will try to do it as soon as we find a suitable resource person for that and suitable time. Okay, thanks a bunch. Thank you. So, if you have filled the feedback form, you can leave this live session and you will just have to wait for the webinar for the certificate to come to you. We will send it through Gmail and so far we have got 133 responses on feedback form. I hope everyone is able to fill the form. The link is given in live chat on YouTube. If you cannot see the live chat, make sure uh, you are watching the webinar direct from the YouTube app. We will wait in your Facebook page for more updates. Thank you. Apart from our Facebook page, we also have a group on Facebook. It is also named as Linguistics and Pedagogy Webinars. We also give updates over there. So, in case if you don't receive a notification or a post from the page, you might receive it from the group. So, you can also join that. And you can also share your ideas, thoughts, or your requests, suggestions in the group. So, and you can also share any valuable and informative material over there. So it's a private group, but you can join it and then you can share your information. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. All right. So if you have filled the feedback form, you can like close this video or something. You can go out and do something else. It depends on you. But after you fill the feedback form, there is nothing else. You just have to wait for the certificate. Okay, so we have got 140 responses so far. I will continue to comment the feedback form link in the live chat till 5:20 p.m. Like for 2 more minutes, we can say. Can we get the recorded version of the webinar, please? Yes, all the recordings of the previous webinars as well as this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel, Linguistics and Pedagogy Webinars. So, yes, you will find the recorded version of this webinar as well. Okay, so we have got 145 responses. Still 48 people are watching. If that's the correct number, I can see that on the video. Okay, congratulations, Linguistics and Pedagogy Webinars, for this comprehensive webinar. Looking forward to the next. Thank you very much, Depra, if that's the right pronunciation of your name. And thank you for the compliments. The webinar is so comprehensive. Thank you very much, friends. Okay, so 1 more minute to go. Please fill the form as soon as possible. We are sharing the link of the feedback form in live chat. Please find that link and fill the form. Soon we will be ending this live broadcast, so you won't be able to fill the feedback form after that. Thank you very much. And one thing more, if we arrange a webinar before the dates of the upcoming webinars, we will post about it on our Facebook page. So make sure you like to that page, and also we will make a scheduled video on YouTube. So you can also see if there is some webinar which is like in upcoming dates before the webinars which are already scheduled. I'm Tijan from Jordan. Our congratulations for the success of this webinar. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Okay, thank you, Farman Ali, for joining the webinar. All right, so it's about the time. Now we are going to end this session, and the certificate, the feedback form link would not be available after that. So, okay, thank you all for joining and being with us, and we hope that you learned a lot. And we will try to arrange as many as possible webinars for you guys. And thank you once again, and take care. See you next time.